If you love Baltimore sports, you'll love WNST.net.
Extravaganza. It's all brought to you by Coors Light. We are at Mother's, where my wings are getting cold, and Coach Billick has already forgotten his iPad tonight. Good evening. How are you? Schedule night in the NFL.
Yeah, well, you got a lot going on, isn't it? I mean, we got the Twins in town, schedule night, and we're doing.
Well, the Orioles are about to lose their 9th in a row.
Yeah,
don't
be negative.
I don't want to be. Yeah, I'm such a negative nil. It's only been 14 years. Are you surprised at how quickly the NFL's kind of fallen off of the world's landscape without conversation? I mean, so much of the league, I think, is predicated on conversation, and there's been no productive football conversation for 11 weeks or whatever it's been. No moves, no teams, no needs, no free agents, no restricted. None of that happened. And I think from a sports fan's perspective, it's been debilitating the last 2 months for me.
Well, I think it's allowed you to focus on the draft. I imagine that when we get to the draft, there will still be record numbers for that Thursday and Friday coverage.
We hope.
Compared to last year, Thursday and Friday outdrew an NBA playoff game, NHL playoff, if I'm not mistaken, and the Yankees were at home. So there's still plenty of interest there. I think the lead up, the NFL's still been first and foremost because of, unfortunately, the labor negotiations. I think where you're really going to feel it is May 1, the day after the draft, because now the idea of the rookies coming in, you're going to get your hands on them as a coach, you're going to start the OTAs. You can't even sign undrafted free agents after the draft. We would normally, just as you're approaching the end of the 7th round, you're scurrying around with your coaches and scouts putting together the 10, 12, 15, 20 guys we need to round out the roster to get in training camp. You can't sign those guys anymore. So from the minute the draft is over, now it's really going to feel different. That's when I think the fans, now the focus is really going to become, hey, let's get this deal done.
The Ravens had their Liars Luncheon today. We went out and talked to them. I think the strangest part of this is not even knowing where your holes are. And I think so much of the league is a little honor system and a little of this and a little of that. And maybe people have talked about trading this or trading that or which guy you're going to sign. But it's too convoluted and too, even if you had bad intentions or ill intentions to know what's going on, because there always is that. I mean, Rex Ryan just happens to be at Bart Scott's house at 11:59, right? I mean, but none of that can even exist in this environment, correct?
Well, the biggest difficulty for the Ravens will be in all the years of working with Ozzie. Ozzie was passionate about addressing the immediate needs that you had for this team in free agency so that you were free in the draft to truly take the best player, and he's been brilliant at it. This year, it's going to be different because you don't know, first, is free agency going to happen? If it does, what you're going to get out of it. So this year, unique to since I've been doing it or since the advent of free agency, you're going to have to do some things with the drafts to address your team needs that teams like the Ravens that take the best player available mentality that they haven't done in the past. And it's what it's allowed them. And the Ravens are picking in a great spot. What have we gotten in the late 20s? Ray Lewis.
Ed Reed. Todd
Heap. Ben Grubbs. Michael Orr. They've done very, very well in this area. The question becomes, does your board now reflect the fact we need A, B, or C? So at 26, they're at 26, right?
Correct.
At 26, we need a receiver, a rush end, or a DB. By God, there happens to be a receiver, rush end, or DB at number 26, where truly you could. That's how you take an Ed Reed when you still have a Rod Woodson. You take a Todd Heap when you still have Shannon Sharp, because you're taking the best player available because you've addressed needs elsewhere.
We're going to let Thurl come up here and do a bunch of the actual player-to-player and team-to-team breakdown. He's on the radio every day. He is, along with Glenn Clark, is our resident draftnik. But I want to talk a little bit more about the foundation and the strangeness of these last 10 weeks for a lot of organizations. I mean, we just learned that there will be a Harbaugh reunion on Thanksgiving night here in Baltimore. We're all excited about that. But imagine taking over a new franchise, not being able to work with your players, not being able to evaluate your players, not being able to get rid of the players you don't want, not being able to go into the market and find new players, and then on top of that, you have to go draft as well, and draft high in the draft. This is a real big challenge. I think it's a big challenge for any new coaching staff who does not know their personnel.
It's a challenge for every staff, but particularly so a new staff. Your teaching sequence, What you do with a veteran team, a team that your coordinators, your coaches are familiar with, that's tough enough as it is, because if I don't know if I'm getting my players May 1, June 1, July 1, in OTAs, you would get about 1,000 snaps, which coincides with every team in the NFL gets roughly 1,000 snaps on either side of the ball during the season. So all but in shorts, you get about a season's worth of snaps to install stuff. Training camp, it's about the same. We would get about 1,000 snaps, not including the preseason games, in practice. So you get basically 2 seasons worth of preparation before the first game. Well, now, am I going to get 3/4 of that? Am I going to get half of that? Am I going to get any of that? That changes the teaching progression. And if I got a new team, it's murder. I just visited with Norv Turner the other day, and he's got a new defensive coordinator. And he says the toughest thing he's having to deal with is Greg Minuski, who's his new defensive coordinator, came down from San Francisco. Greg wants to come, guns a-blazing, because we want to do this, this, and this. But you got to remember, you got a new group. They're not used to what you've built up to. Don't give me the playbook from year 10 of what you're doing. You got to go back to year 1, because it's a new teaching sequence. Otherwise, you're going to go too fast. It's going to go over their head, even with a veteran crew. That teaching sequence is hugely affected by this. And now you're going to, up to now, the coaches, their world today is the same it was a year ago today. They're getting ready for the draft. But the next day after the end of the draft, that's when their world changes dramatically, and they're not going to like it.
What about teams with large quantities of players that they wanted to overhaul? Usually the bottom half of the league, I mean, the turnover on a good team is a dozen guys, right? I mean, most years you're turning over 12 to 15 guys in any given year from year to year. How do you even begin to assess what's going to be available in the marketplace? Or do you just almost assume you're going to move forward with what you've got, even though you're not? But what happens if there's not a normal course of business for the league, or it's restricted to just a couple of weeks in August if it were to come down like that?
Well, you got to tell me the rules. Are we going to have a free agency? I mean, I haven't yet to someone tell me what happens if this agreement happens. God forbid it goes this late. But let's say it happens the 15th of August. And they say, okay, you got to crank up in 2 weeks for the opener. Or the 1st of August. Okay, we'll get all the preseason games in. When does free agency begin? Is there a free agency? What is my team made of? And you're going to do that during training camp. All of a sudden, all right, we're going to start in a week in training camp, but free agency is open for the next 10 days. I mean, no one has an answer for these questions until we get there. I visited with the coach the other day that says we got scheduling meetings for scheduling meetings. We're scheduling time to meet so we can talk about schedules if we start up on May 1, June 1, July 1, August 1.
So there's literally 5 plans in every building.
5. I wish it could be limited to 5. There's 1A, B, and C, 2A, B, and C. Because what happens, what if we have no free agency? What if we do have free agency? How do I get these college free agents signed? I think you're going to see a lot of, if it's done late enough, I think you're going to see a lot of teams, because they have less time to evaluate these young players, I think you're going to see a lot of younger players hit the street, because you got to go with the quantified abilities of your veteran players, or you're going to have to roll the dice on a bunch of guys I really haven't seen enough of, but they're young. We think they're pretty good. Let's see if they can do it, and you're going to make a mistake.
If you love Baltimore sports, you'll love WNST.net.